Hello, this is Reverend Don Lewis coming to you from the beautiful metaverse, and more specifically from beautiful Danville, Illinois, homeland, the Corellian tradition. And this is Midday with Reverend Don. Welcome. And as you know, if you follow Midday with Reverend Don, you can type your questions or comments onto most any platform that you're watching this on, and they will show up here in my chat room. Chat room is on the screen because I have no guest today, so we can all share it together. There are a couple of platforms that comments will not show up from, but most they will show up. And hello to Reverend Mary in the chat room. It's good to see you, Mary. And one of the things I like best about our current platforms is to be able to have this instant communication. I think it's very positive. So today, my subject is, quote, baby witches, end quote. And I had not originally wanted this to be my subject, but I'm going to tell you how it became my subject for today and where I plan to go with it. And hello to High Priest 012 in the chat room. And High Priest 012 says it has a catchy title. Thank you, High Priest. The subject of baby witches may not seem like it's a deep political subject. And as you know, one of the things I talk about on this program is politics quite a bit because I've been involved in what we might call pagan politics for 40 odd, well, close to 50 years now. And there are a lot of things. And hello to ML Star in the chat room. That one encounters in terms of political issues you may not initially realize are political. Things that touch on issues like critical thinking, keeping things in perspective, choosing your fights, desired outcomes, and assessing those outcomes as you pursue them. These are all political issues, and these are all very much bound up in the subject of today's program. I've talked about all of them before, but today I'm going to talk a little bit about them again. And ML Star asks about abundance rituals available for tonight. Well, tonight, I believe, is the full moon, a good night for abundance rituals, certainly. And, if you have my book, Ritual and Theory and Practice, you'll have some good examples that you might use for that. If you have studied at the school that I co-founded, witchschool.com, we teach excessively about that. And all of the individual aspects we talk about in different places. Hello to an invisible friend. It's good to see you, invisible friend. But getting back to baby witches, one of the ways that I choose my subjects for this program, if I don't already have an idea when I get up in the morning, I basically say, Spirit, tell me what I should talk about today. And that's what I did this morning. And I started looking at my various social media. And one of the first things I saw was someone's post about the term baby witch. And this person was terribly upset that there are some people in the world, in the pagan community. Oh, and High Priest 012 says, I have it. That's wonderful, High Priest. And I hope that you enjoy it. But this person was very upset that some people choose to call themselves baby witches because of this, that, and the other reason. And they went on about it at quite a length and then had all kinds of other people commenting on this. Some of whom thought it was an irrelevancy, some of whom agreed that it was a terrible term, others thought it was a lovely term. Some people thought they should call themselves witchlings instead. And my first thought was, well, this is an irrelevancy. But then I kept being drawn back to it. And it's not an irrelevancy. Hello to Daniel Michael in the chat room. It actually is potentially a very instructional point on the subjects that I've just mentioned, like keeping things in perspective and choosing your battles and shadow work. Talk about shadow work a lot. When we live, no matter how skilled we are, we constantly have additions to our shadow self, the parts of ourself that we don't consciously perceive. Um, and these come from a variety of sources, but usually from various levels of emotional trauma or things we will not deal with. And it's important that we try to deal with these things. And even when you've been doing this for years and years and years, this still continues to be there, but it's easier to deal with at that point. Now, Daniel says, I think part of shadow work is not just inner shadow, but leaning into the shadows that life throws you. It's how we get stronger. Well, I would agree with that, yes. Um, and I think that one of the things I have found in doing shadow work is that the deeper you get with it, the more you find that even though you may not think you share them, there are certain universal shadows or social shadows that still affect us that we still need to do healing on. Um, and working to heal our shadow, working to integrate our shadow, working to retrieve that energy through soul retrieval and other techniques is, I think, a vitally important technique. Daniel says the sword sharpens on the stone. Yes, it does. It truly does. And one of the things I've found in magic that so often causes people problems is tripping over their own crossed wires. And this, I think, is a very strong example. The people who get so upset about the term baby witch of crossed wires and shadow work. And I say that because I don't think that anyone is ever actually upset about something that someone else calls themselves. They have no reason to be upset about something someone else calls themselves, except they think it says something about them. And the people who are upset about the term baby, which they often reveal in their comments, they're really upset because they think it somehow questions their legitimacy or the legitimacy of the movement. Now, the people who call themselves baby witches do so by choice and as a term of endearment. It's part of a wider movement that um, uses the term as a form of affection and is certainly not meant to lessen anything. But the fact that it affects some people so negatively speaks to their shadow. And my message to them is you really need to look at why this affects you. And hello to Steve Taylor in the chat room. And High Priest says, did you say deal with or will not yield with? No, I said deal with. And what I mean by deal with basically is to heal and to reintegrate the energy that we have put into the shadow. To see it, to reintegrate it into our conscious selves. Because when something goes into the shadow, that energy in many ways becomes lost to us. This is what we do when we do soul retrieval. We're pulling things back out of that shadow. And there are some people who have so much stuffed into their shadow that they have more energy stuck there than they have available to their conscious self. Now, Daniel says, I think I always just assumed the term was them acknowledging they don't know everything. And yes, that's my understanding. And Daniel says, which getting it in a way to be humble. Yes, I've always understood that too. And that's what they usually say when you ask them, that they're acknowledging that they're new to learning. They're saying, I'm just a baby witch, I'm still learning. And, whether you like the term or not, the most significant issue here is that they're calling themselves that or anything else doesn't affect you. Making it into some big cause is a distraction. It takes your energy and puts it on something that is not important. And so, my next question is, why are you doing that in a world where there are so many important things we should be doing? You don't get to choose what other people call themselves. The sole exception to that might be within specific organizations, but neither the pagan nor the Wiccan community is a single organization. Now, if you're talking about what people call themselves in your particular coven or your particular tradition, that might be different. But within the wider movement, you don't get to choose it. They may call themselves something you don't like. And for the most part, that's not really something to get upset about. There are real things going on in the world that I've spent many months talking about that we should be upset about, that we should be putting our energies into. This is not one of them. And hello to Nicholas in the chat room. Nicholas, Nickery, says, a few years ago, I was having health problems and I got in trouble for calling myself a baby witch. And now I know why. Thanks. Well, and I think there should have been no problem with your calling yourself that. I think, and there's so many things to say about this. One, it's a distraction of energy that could be spent in better places. It's taking an irrelevant issue and blowing it out of perspective when there are other far more relevant things going on. But it's also supremely impractical in one very important way. And that is, if you've just met someone and you go off on them because they call themselves a baby witch or whatever, what do you think, using your critical thinking skills, is the effect you're going to have? Are you going to impress them with your wisdom and knowledge, or are you going to alienate them so they'll never listen to anything you say again? I'm going to tell you it's going to be the second one. And I have watched people in the pagan community do this dozens of times in my lifetime. I've watched them beat young people away with sticks by being disdainful because they don't know this or that, when they could have been charitable and compassionate and educational instead, but they chose to be arrogant, disdainful, flat out rude, and totally alienated those people. And then they wonder why younger people don't listen to them. I hear so-called elders talk all the time about how younger people won't listen to them. Well, in a lot of cases, I know personally from having watched it, those same elders, when younger people were listening to them, treated them very dismissively and very rudely. So of course younger people aren't listening to you. Use some common sense, some compassion, meet people where you find them, and think about how people are going to react to what you're saying. And keep things in perspective. Now, Daniel says, I like the term warlock, for example. Some people don't. This is a very controversial term. And I am not particularly fond of that term, but I also recognize I don't get to choose what other people call themselves, at least not in the wider world. And equally, it's not important. It's what you're doing, not what you call yourself, that I should be careful of. Mary says, it's easy to fuss about a name. It's hard to focus energy on real problems like fire relief or helping North Carolina. And this is exactly what I'm trying to say. It's very easy, and our community has a real weakness for focusing on disagreements over inconsequential issues. Things that don't add up to anything in the long run, like what people call themselves, differences in things like quarter symbolism or quarter colors, or various pieces of theology on which we might reasonably disagree, rather than things where we could do real good in the world, like working with disaster relief, or dealing with the political situations we face. Those are much harder problems. But far, far more important, it's easy to go argue about this thing and pretend that we're doing something when we're really wasting our energy on irrelevancies. Now, High Priest says, I was taught warlock is a pejorative term that means oathbreaker. I come from that same background, but High Priest goes on to say the truth is that that's inconsequential. And yes, we use this term in different ways, and I, for one, am perfectly happy to simply acknowledge that we do. In the tradition I come from, it was not considered a good term, but there are people in my tradition who use it, and I'm not going to worry myself about that. I am much more concerned about what they actually do. I'm much more concerned about the effects of our actions and taking actions that have effects, taking actions that lead to good consequences. Arguing about things like this, I can remember people back in the 90s having huge arguments over the fact that different traditions used different colors for quarter symbolism. But no, that's been the case throughout my entire life, and what of it? These are not the things that have anything to do with the world we are going to get for our future. They may have to do with our ego, they may have to do with our vanity, and often they're simply distractions that give us an excuse not to do the more important things. And I think it's very important that we learn to keep things in perspective. And as a community, we have not had that skill. If you're a magical person, you know that where you put your energy, where you put your thoughts, these things have effects. And so putting these things with perspective to places where they matter are important. And I think that is my message for today. I've been talking a lot through the last year about Project 2025. I'm sure I'll be talking about it a lot now in this year 25. I've been talking a lot about the rise of Christian nationalism, and I've talked to some extent about disaster relief, which I think we're going to be seeing a lot more need for. We're at a time of great climate, great climate catastrophes happening, and we need to really be mindful of what we can do to help with this, particularly for our own people. And as a community, I don't think we are right now, and we need to think about that. We were talking the other day about the loss of the Theosophical Society's records in this fire. There are a lot of pagans in Los Angeles and that area. A lot of our community is being hit by this, whether we're hearing about it right now or not. We need to be mindful of that. We need to be thinking how we can help those people, because we're helping ourselves when we help our community. Now, hello to Ed the Pagan in the chat room. Ed says, actually in the 90s, much of the witch community was grabbing Wicca as a softer word. And a softer public word, that's true. Also in the 1970s and 80s. And that's why there's so much resentment in some sectors toward that word. That's true. And hello to Unique One in the chat room. Unique One says, this feels like the calm before the storm. How do we keep positive and hopeful? I think that's part of what I'm trying to say. Using distractions to focus our attention on inconsequential matters where we pretend we're doing something important is not the answer to staying positive and hopeful. That will leave us hopeless in the end when we realize how badly we wasted our energy. The way to stay positive and hopeful is by focusing on practical actions, by keeping abreast of what's happening and doing what we can to stand up for what we believe in, by being active, and by not being blown around passively by the wind, by remembering that we are magical people and that we are active people in an actual world who can do many different things, both magical and practical, to stand up for what we believe in. And that, yes, sometimes it does seem like the world is going in a very different direction from what some of us wish to see. But that doesn't mean that we just stop. It means we keep doing, as I always say, that next right thing. We keep being the change we wish to see. We keep working for what we feel is right. And, sometimes it's going to take a while to do that. One of the things I remember and will never forget when I was last in South Africa, and I've gone to South Africa more than once because we have Karelian people in South Africa, led by the Archpriestess Rain, Rain Pakri, our senior priestess in Africa, and one of the Karelian Council of Elders. And she was my host on my last trip there. And one of the things that I saw while I was there, I had a tour of the city of Cape Town. And one of the things I saw there was a vast area of undeveloped land in the center of the city. Very, very valuable land that's been left vacant for generations now, because it was once the integrated center of the city before the apartheid government came in and bulldozed it. And it was left vacant as a protest against apartheid because Cape Town, as I understand it, was as a whole not in favor of apartheid and strongly opposed to it. Many people in Cape Town worked against this, stood against this for many years while everything seemed to get worse. But eventually, apartheid was overthrown. And those who had stood against it eventually saw a better world in that sense. Sometimes you do have to fight, and maybe sometimes the fight is the point. The fact that you do stand up for what you care about is the point. And my point today is, when we talk about standing up for what we care about, is someone calling themselves Baby Witch really something you care about enough to be concerned about? Compared to things like racial equality, gender equality, equality for sexual orientation, etc. The general freedoms of our society does this really warrant your attention? Now, Daniel says, I know people who are still upset at Bob Dylan for using an electric guitar, like they're protecting something. And, I think that's a very good example. And the electric guitar in music turned out to be a revolutionary thing. Many wonderful pieces of music have been developed with the electric guitar. And anyone who insists that only the acoustic guitar has any value is obviously wrong. And they're right up there with anyone who insists that only the lyre should be used. Obviously, more modern instruments have their place. The harp was not the pinnacle of music, but harps are wonderful. The lyre is a wonderful instrument, but so is the guitar, so is the electric guitar. We keep developing, we keep changing. When it comes to what people call themselves, in the conversation I saw this morning, someone was saying, I like to call young witches witchlings. But that's a lovely term. It says 1980s all over it, but it's a lovely term. I remember when it was the popular term in the 1980s. Today, I think it's rather dated. Nothing wrong with that. But, let's bear this in mind. Terms change. The term baby witch is going to be very old-fashioned in 10 years, and nobody's going to be wanting to call themselves that. All the energy spent debating that term is wasted energy. And this is true for many inconsequential subjects that people love to argue about. But the tragedy is that there are so many consequential subjects we could be focusing on. And that is my message to you for today. To pick your battles, keep things in perspective, and remember what's really important, what really affects you, and focus on that. And if you think that someone else calling themselves something that is not the same as what you call yourself really affects you, well, you have a very fortunate life. That's all that I can say. Now, Mary says, we tend to call the grandkids witchlings. Well, that's lovely. And many people do. It's a common and very popular term, but it's not the only one. And these terms keep changing. They keep growing. And I think it would be a tragedy if they didn't keep changing and growing. And there are lots of things that we can call people in positive ways. There are lots of nasty things we can call people too, but we should not. And that's a completely different subject. When people are using slurs and hateful terms, I think it is quite reasonable to get upset about that. But what people choose to call themselves, this is not a consequential subject. With that, I want to take a moment for a word from our sponsors. Why? Because we love our sponsors. And here we go.
Ready to unlock the secrets of the universe? Join me, Rev Don Lewis, for my metaphysical and magic auctions at Gaia Thrift at whatnot.com. Discover fascinating artifacts, mystical crystals, and rare and unusual books that could change your life. Don't miss this chance to bring a little magic into your world. Rev Don's Metaphysical and Magic Auctions, where the extraordinary can become yours.
And thank you to our sponsors, Equinox Learning Hub and Rev Don's Metaphysical and Magic Auctions. Gaia Thrift has been closed initially for the New Year holiday, and also because of the weather here. We'll be reopening on Wednesday, and we'll have news of our future auctions coming soon. We also have a number of other exciting things we'll be talking about in the future, including the Reverend Don's fashion line. But more about that coming soon. I want to thank you for joining me. I hope that you have enjoyed the program, and I will see you again tomorrow. And let us close with our prayer, as we always do. Divine Mother Goddess, Divine Father God, beloved ancestors, we thank you for all that you do for us in our lives, and we rejoice in this walk we walk together, and we ask you to help us to keep our minds open and elastic, to adapt to the changes that life brings our way. Help us to keep our perspective and to see the things that are truly important for us to deal with, and help us to deal with them. And help us not to give in to distractions that cause us to waste our energy, but rather to use our energy to build a better life and a better world. Beloved Mother Goddess, beloved Father God, beloved ancestors, we thank you with great love, knowing you're always with us. From respect, we thank you for your presence, and may you be blessed now and always. I thank you for your presence. May you be blessed now and always. And I'll see you again tomorrow.